So I realized that I already have like 3 different shows about watching totally random anime between Spin the Crunchy Roulette and Finish or Fail 2016 shows and the Board of Second Chances over there. But I saw an opportunity for another one and I couldn't resist. So I was introduced on Twitter to this website called uh, graph.anime.plus, which is a site that takes your MyAnimeList data and gives you a bunch of extra statistics and shit about it, such as the fact that apparently I have completed 6.01% of all anime as listed on MyAnimeList. So, fun information on this site, but one of the coolest things about it is that it has a special recommendation page where it recommends you a bunch of shows that you don't have on your list at all based on what categories you've given the highest scores to of anime in the past. Now, looking through these, I have no idea if these are going to be shows I like. What's most interesting to me about them is that they're not the kinds of shows that I usually get recommended. Most of it's stuff that I don't even really know if it's any good or not. Not that they're not popular shows. Some of them are, just that they're not shows that like anyone's ever recommended me. So seeing a list like this, I absolutely had to give some of these shows a shot. So let's select one. Flame of Recca. Alrighty, well, I just watched 3 episodes of Flame of Recca, and while it was not bad, I think I've probably seen enough of it. When I started up the show, the first things that caught my attention were that it had director Noriyuki Abe's name on it and Studio Piero's name on it, which is the same director and the same studio that handled Yu Yu Hakusho in 1992, followed by Ninku, which was another shonen manga adaptation, and Flame of Recca obviously follows in the same footsteps. 1997, another long-form shonen adaptation, this one from a Shonen Sunday manga as opposed to Shonen Jump. And I thought that was interesting, so I was like, oh, hey, it's a lot of the staff from Yu Yu Hakusho. This must be like, the next in the chain of shows that they continually worked on, because that same staff, like a lot of the same staff anyways, had worked on like a bunch of shows throughout the 90s. Some of them had broken off, like Shinbo, who left after Yu Yu Hakusho to go work for JC staff and do a bunch of shit with them, and like freelance work. But nonetheless, I also saw like Atsushi Wakabayashi's name on there, who is one of the best animators for Yu Yu Hakusho. And the next thing that caught my eye about Flame of Recca was awesome fight animation, which I'm sure some of it was courtesy of Wakabayashi. Great fight direction, even when the animation's not that special in some episodes. The directing of it's great, but there's moments of just super kick-ass character animation during the fights. So I was like, awesome, this could be kind of like Yu Yu Hakusho, where it's a somewhat standard shonen storyline, but with really great fights, great production, and stuff like that. And I would say that while there's an element of that, this show just feels exponentially weaker and like more devoid of ideas compared to Yu Yu Hakusho. Whereas like Yu Yu Hakusho has really strong characters right out the gate, a really strong premise. I think it really like comes out swinging and gets your attention. Flame of Recca just feels unbelievably generic, and like I'm willing to forgive that to some extent. Like I don't mind watching a pretty standard shonen series, but this is like almost no ideas really. Like if you watch Yu Yu Hakusho, then there's the whole premise of him being dead and he's like a spirit warrior, and there's all these like ideas of what the spirit world is, and this is all pretty early on. If you were to watch something like a recent shonen series that was pretty typical, like My Hero Academia, where it was like like what happens in the story is pretty typical of shonen stories, but like the idea of they're all superheroes and everyone in the world has a quirk and there's like a school for superheroes and like all that is things. Flame of Recca is like this kid doesn't know that he was descended from this shinobi clan, like this ninja clan, but just like he just happens to think of himself as a ninja. He's super powerful and he can shoot flames out of his hand. As he finds out at the end of episode 1. And that's like it. That's the premise. Like, each episode so far has been this woman who, I don't know, she might be his mother, who like sent him from 400 years ago. She like put him into a time portal, and it made it so she stopped aging, and he's in the future, or the present rather. And she's been like turning all these other people against him and making them fight him because she's trying to awaken his power, no doubt, so that he can save the world, in the next big story arc. But like, just the what of what's happening in the story is this kid who thinks he's a ninja who shoots fire is just fighting other kids. It's really boring and like really unoriginal. And like, I remember when I was a kid, the reason I never watched Flame of Recca, because I had heard of it. I'd heard of practically any like big shonen series back then, because I read lots of anime magazines and I read lots of forums. So I would see, everything get talked about to some extent. And I remember as a kid reading the description of Flame of Recca and being like, so his power is just that he shoots fire? Like, I've seen 1,000 shows with characters who can shoot fire. I'm 12 and I've seen characters who can shoot fire. It just didn't seem like interesting. Like, I mean, partly because I was more into swords. I wanted to see characters who were like, fighting with swords and shit or had some kind of weapon. So when I just heard he shoots fire, I was like, that sounds kind of boring. And now I'm watching the show and he's shooting fire and I'm like, kind of boring. I actually think his ninja tricks were more interesting than the fire shooting thing when that started becoming a thing. So like the first episode just kind of felt like a pretty generic setup. The main character guy saves this girl's life because she's, it's like he sees this cute girl who goes to a school. He saves her life. She heals him because she has like a healing power. And then he gets attacked by this lady and he realizes he has special powers. Then the next episode actually started off, it had caught my attention because of an interesting character dynamic, which is that at the end of episode 1, the main character guy pledges to become the girl, he pledges to become her ninja. So sort of like a romantic undercurrent there already, and like, what's great is in episode 2, he's like following her around, calling her princess and saying how he's her ninja, and it like causes a stir at school. So I like that he's like this almost cringe level, like, clingy weirdo, which you don't really get in shonen protagonists. Usually the guy is the one who's trying to, like, push the girl away, or, not willing to admit his feelings kind of thing. And while he's not, like, admitting to a romantic attachment, the fact that he's so attached to her, I thought was really kind of adorable and funny. But then that kind of is just a thing at like the start of episode 2. Like, while that's his motivation is that he's trying to protect her throughout the, like obviously going to be a thing throughout the series, that idea of him as like this really clingy, like attached weirdo really felt like more of a one-off joke. And then the rest of that episode and the next episode was just like a bunch of fights, and it was just leading into more fights. The fights were not interesting, and kind of what made me give up on it was like this weird leap in character development that happens in episode 2, where there's one character who's like this big thug guy at the school, right? He calls himself the strongest high school student. And when we're introduced to Recca in episode 1, he's fighting this guy, and of course he's trouncing him. He's just, he's a ninja kid, he's the main character. Of course he's gonna trounce the big bully, because that's what every 90s shonen protagonist would do. So he's trouncing this guy, and then in episode 2, the guy shows up again, and he's all pissed off. He trounces him again. So then, towards the end of episode 2, Recca has this girl who's been, like, feuding with him her whole life. She's obviously kind of like a tsundere-ish thing, but she's been fighting him forever, because if she ever beats him, he'll become her ninja, and she wants that. She claims she wants it so she can, have her honor or her pride and humiliate him, but, it's pretty obvious she's probably more interested in the romantic side of it. But so she gets like mind controlled by the bad guy, and she's fighting the main character guy. And then the big dude like shows up at the school and notices this is happening, and then he suddenly is like this super chivalrous dude who like goes in and like the girl's like shooting all these wind beams at the main character guy, and the big dude's like taking all the hits, and he goes up to her and he puts his hands on her shoulder and he's like, I want you to go back to the person I know as opposed to this. We have never had any indication that these two know each other. There was never a single moment where they were in the same scene together. This guy has done nothing other than show up twice to get his ass kicked by the main character and just be like a doofus. And then all of a sudden, he shows up and is like the chivalrous guy. And so I felt like they were trying to make him like a Kuwabara type character. But like in Yu Yu Hakusho, you've got like the whole first episode where Yusuke's beating the shit out of Kuwabara all the time. And then, like, you have this amazing reveal where at Yusuke's funeral, like, Kuwabara's losing his shit because he's lost his sparring partner. Like, the only person who, you know, gave meaning to his life was fighting this guy. And then, like, they have this rivalry even when Yusuke gets healed. But, like, you know, they slowly become friends. And then by the end, they're, like, inseparable buddies. This dude literally goes from... man, I hate the main character, I just want to fight him, I just want to kick his ass, to all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this, like, good friend chivalrous guy. Like, when he's getting attacked by the enemy, the main, like, Recca calls him, like, he's like, oh, you attacked my comrade. I'm like, when the fuck was he your comrade? When was any of this established? It just felt so out of nowhere. Like, the story just took it for granted that obviously this guy was going to turn out to be a nice guy, because how could he not? That's how it always goes in these shows. At that point, I didn't even realize that guy wasn't just going to be a random side character, because he's got, like, a really ugly design, like, beyond Kuwabara ugly, like, just, he looks like a generic background bully character, you know? So it was really weird that he was suddenly like, oh, by the way, I'm going to be, like, a main character guy, like, I'm important, and I was like, oh, that's weird. So anyways, all that aside, by the end of episode 3, I was pretty bored, and it just seemed, like, ruthlessly generic. And, again, I'm not saying it's, like, a huge knock against the show, but it's, like, 47 episodes long, and it's not that I don't think anything good will probably happen in the show. I'm sure it has its moments, but, like, it doesn't have nearly enough moments, you know? Like, in a world that is oversaturated with Shonen Jump adaptations, this is not Shonen Jump, but in a world that's oversaturated with Shonen Jump adaptations, I have pick of the litter. I could watch, you know, plenty of other shows that are exactly like this, but better, including Yu Yu Hakusho, which is one of my, you know, favorite shows. So, yeah, I don't know. Not interested in continuing that one. Kuroko no Basuke. So I just watched 13 episodes of Kuroko no Basuke, and I'll probably watch the rest of at least the first season. I was actually kind of surprised by how much I enjoyed it. And the reason I stopped after episode 13 to talk about it is that I'm really fascinated with the parallels to Haikyuu and how I would compare them, and why I like this show more. It's pretty easy to compare these two shows, because both of them are Shonen Jump manga that have been adapted into anime by Production IG. Both have, Kuroko no Basuke has 3 25-episode seasons, Haikyuu has 2, and it has an upcoming 8 or 10 episode season, as I understand it, from people in the comments on my video on Haikyuu. They're both team sports anime. Both of them are focused on the main characters going to the Inter-High Championship and competing against other high schools. But they have very different attitudes. And so it's fascinating to me that they can have so many similarities. But, like, whereas Haikyuu was just not interesting enough to me that I wanted to watch a whole lot of it, Kuroko no Basuke is just interesting enough that I want to go on watching it. It's like such a tiny margin there. But it's because of the way that the shows have very different attitudes. And from the way that people described Kuroko no Basuke to me, the reason I never gave this show a shot up until this point, even though Haikyuu and Kuroko no Basuke are both very popular and very highly rated. They're both shows that have very big fan bases that lots of people care about. Obviously, the fact that they're going on to 3rd seasons means that they're, you know, pretty beloved. But from what I had always heard, Haikyuu seemed like it was the better show in terms of just being smarter and better put together. Haikyuu has overall better animation. It has better portrayal of its sport. It feels more real. It, like, feels like you're watching a well-made sport anime as opposed to just, well, I won't get too into that yet. But Haikyuu is just, it's like something that feels a little classier, maybe. People always describe to me that Kuroko no Basuke was more of like each character kind of has superpowers, or they have, like, you know, very specific things that make them stand out that are like a little overboard, like a little over the top. It doesn't focus as much on the team aspect, even though one of the themes of the show is that you should have like the whole team matters. It doesn't focus on exploring the entire team as much as Haikyuu does. Just in general, it's always been kind of presented to me as like these two shows are very similar, but Haikyuu is the better one, and Haikyuu is the one you should look out for. And I think that on some level, I think it really would come down to just what you're looking for out of a sports show or out of anime in general to determine which one you'd like more. So the first major thing that's different between them is, as I said, the sort of superpowered thing. Now, in robot anime, there are two distinct types of robot anime. There's super robots and real robots. Super robots are robots that can just use all kinds of crazy super attacks. They can bust shit out at the last minute and do the impossible. Something like Gurren Lagann is the epitome of a super robot show. And then there's real robots where they try to have like a logic behind what's going on with the robots, where each one is like a military machine and they have limits. You understand their specs from the beginning. They can't just bust out a new super move out of nowhere. You know, they're more there to facilitate combat in a militaristic setting. So something like Gundam or anything that, you know, that follows that sort of trend. Not that those shows are always super realistic, but they're more in that line. And my friend Ghost Lightning, fellow anime blogger, who wrote all kinds of great stuff, and you should read all his blog posts, but he wrote once about the idea that there might also be a super samurai and a real samurai genre, where super samurai shows are things like Rurouni Kenshin, and real samurai stuff is more along the lines of maybe Vagabond, although that one's still, I mean, that one's only unrealistic because it's the story of Musashi, who's like a, you know, legendary figure. But I think that we can also apply this to sports, and I'm sure Ghost Lightning would agree. He would probably have given the title of super sports anime to something like Prince of Tennis, and real sports anime to maybe something like Baby Steps. Although Baby Steps did have like one or two arcs where the opponent had like a weird thing, like the guy who used tennis balls to paint pictures on the courts. That was weird, but for the most part, it's fairly realistic. And I think that that's one of the biggest attitude differences between Haikyuu and Kuroko no Basket, is that Haikyuu is pretty grounded. Like, each character has a thing they're great at, but those are just like normal aspects of the game. This kid can spike really well. This kid can always catch. He's great at defense. He's just, you know, always in the right place at the right time. This kid can jump super high. Kuroko no Basket has a similar thing, but each person's ability is just slightly outside the realms of possible. Like in Haikyuu, you could kind of imagine high schoolers being able to do these things. In Kuroko no Basket, there's one guy who just never misses a shot no matter where he is on the court. That's his ability. You know, he will never take a shot that he can't make, and he can do one from anywhere. There's a character who can instantly learn the moves of anyone he watches just by seeing them do it once, you know. There's the main characters are like a two-man team. There's Kuroko, whose ability is that people can't sense his presence very well, and so he sort of is invisible on the court, and he's not very physically capable, but he can pass to anybody. So people give him passes, and he just redirects the ball everywhere. It's like the ultimate support. And then there's God, I don't remember his name, but the red-haired guy who's like his partner, who seems to be something of a basketball new type, that he's constantly developing, like, he's getting stronger and stronger the more he plays, just out of sheer determination kind of thing. And his thing is that he can jump super high, and is just generally super powerful. So these characters, while just like in Haikyuu, each of them has something they're strong at, they strain the limits of, you know, physical ability to where it's not like they have literal superpowers. You know, these are things you could reasonably understand a person being able to do. It's more that the consistency they do them with is unrealistic. If you've ever seen a show like maybe Saki would be a good comparison, where that show was about mahjong, and it was like, you know, characters were doing things that are like real moves, except that this character can do it every time, even though the chances are 1 in a million, literally. So, you know, there's stuff like that. And Kuroko no Basket sort of falls in with that. Now, on the one hand, this can be fine. I mean, it's not that different from another shonen action series where each character has some kind of unique power. You know, it's pretty much the same thing, just with sports, as opposed to they have literal superpowers. But the problem that can rise from this, especially in a sports series, is that it's easy to pull shit out of your ass. It's easy to have characters who just all of a sudden, like, you know, his ability is that he can jump high, but now he's just jumping higher because that's what it calls for in the scene. You know, and you always run risks like that when you focus too much on the special abilities as opposed to just the characterization, you know. And you lose out on some of that feeling of, like, this being real sports and being something that reflects reality in some way. So I kind of knew going into Kuroko no Basket that it was going to be more of a super sports anime, and it lets you know that pretty early on. But it really doesn't focus that much on the special abilities. Each character has a special ability, and the interplay of those abilities is important and, you know, is what keeps the matches interesting. But I really feel like the show is more concerned about the characters and their dynamic with each other in terms of their personalities than it is specifically about the moves. I mean, I guess that's debatable, but I feel like that's, like, it definitely focuses more on the moves than Haikyuu does, but it's not, like, all about, you know, pulling out the strongest move at the right moment to win the game. It's more about what the games mean to the characters involved. But to get to the heart of what I think this show has over Haikyuu structurally, in spite of being less realistic, is that it does the shonen format better. In that it does a better job of getting me, like, excited for what's to come and, like, having all the characters be really distinct and interesting. In Haikyuu, one of my problems with, like, the main team is that I kind of felt like they all bled into each other. Each one did have their own, like, you know, personality traits and their own abilities, but they all kind of felt like they were all the same, like, goody two-shoes kind of characters. They all, you know, would get emotional at the same time. They all would get angry at the same times. You know, they had these, like, you sort of had this feeling like the whole team was one entity, you know, more so than individuals, which is good, a good message for a sports anime, and I think that's something it has over Kuroko no Basket, where some of the members of the team just don't really feel useful at all. But in Kuroko no Basket, the characters who do matter have really distinct personalities. They're all very different from one another, and they all have, you know, these really distinct quirks, some of which are interesting, and they really are differentiable from each other. And also, the characters just have way more attitude. They are more arrogant and cool. And, like, I feel like as I was watching this show, I was reminded of the fact that I tend to gravitate towards characters who are more full of themselves, or who, you know, are confident and who want to be the best that they can possibly be. And the main guy, not Kuroko, but the friend guy, the red-haired dude, I don't know why I can't remember his name. He's my favorite character in the show because he's this, like, hot-headed go-getter guy, and he, you know, wants to win, but he also enjoys losing, because when or not so much that he enjoys losing, but he enjoys knowing that there's people stronger than him, because when he sees someone stronger than him, he sees it as, now I know what I have to beat. Now I know how much stronger I need to get so I can beat that guy. And I love that attitude. That's the attitude that I usually take. When I see something that's more like someone doing something similar to me, but they're more successful or they're better at it, then I'm like, yes, now I know there's a new height that I can reach, that I can be striving for, you know, and that's how this character acts. He's always looking for a new peak that he can reach, and when he realizes that he's not the strongest, when he realizes that there's people above him, he gets excited about it, as opposed to depressed about it. And then Kuroko is just kind of an overpowered, like, badass who just wants to sort of, you know, help this guy to become the best player. And he's like, I'm just gonna be your shadow. You are the light, I am the shadow. The more intense the light, the stronger the shadow gets, and the two of us will make each other the strongest possible players we can. And he's been trying to, like, form the idea that they really need each other and that neither one of them could just win by themselves, because he comes from this team called the Generation of Miracles, where it was 5 superpowered badasses, each of whom was treated like they were always the star of the show. And, you know, as they've moved on to each one being on their own team, those teams are all just like formed around that guy, and he doesn't like that aspect of his team. Now, that part of the theme is not presented the best by the show, because the main team feels like it's carried by just a couple of guys, and every other team only feels like as much like that as their team does. Like, there's no team so far that has felt like it was really just the one dude carrying it, except in like certain moments when they want to present that idea. But like, I don't think it's such a huge difference in the way it's presented that it comes across like a big, interesting, important theme in the way that it seems to be, you know, saying that it is. But nonetheless, I really like the attitudes of the characters, and I also like the fact that they are kind of overpowered, that Kuroko comes from the most elite group of students, and even though he's the one who nobody knew about, because his whole thing was that he had no presence and he was invisible, so like, the team he was on was 5 people who were considered the best ever, and then him, who everyone on the team knew was great, but like the media and the mass, you know, people, the masses don't know how good he is, but his new team does, and they totally rely on him and the big guy. And the reason I love that is that I kind of hate the underdog narrative, which is, I know it's weird, and okay, I won't say I hate it. I mean, if an underdog story is done well, I'll probably enjoy it as much as the next guy, but I hate the idea of always rooting for the underdog, because, and there's a great line in Kuroko no Basket that explains how I feel about this perfectly, which is where one of the characters says, "The strong don't win, those who win are strong." And I think that that totally overturns the idea of the underdog. Because if you win, then you were the stronger one. So this whole idea that the weaker person overcame the stronger person and won is bullshit. Because whoever won is the stronger person. So that's why I find like the underdog idea broken. It's like everyone thinks, oh, these guys are they're the newcomers, or they're the upstarts, they're the ones who weren't as strong, and then they win. Oh my god, I can't believe they won. But then now you know they were never really the underdogs. They were always the better team because they won. So, you know, I like it when a story can present, and I talked about this in the Asterisk War Sucks series in the part where I talked about Chivalry of a Failed Knight. I like the overdog posing as underdog type stories, where you've got a character who is one of the strongest at what they're doing, but people don't recognize it. And so it's not so much about them overcoming opponents who are stronger than them, it's about them proving that they were stronger than them all along. And I think Kuroko no Basket sort of falls into that sort of category, where the main team, it's like a new school, they haven't been able to prove themselves. You know, the year before it was all first years, and they just kind of got stomped fairly early before they made it to the, I think they got killed at like the end of the preliminaries before, or somewhere in the preliminaries before making it to the, what's it called, the inter-high. And so now they've got like new members on their team who are super strong, and like no one knows how strong these members might be, but they don't present them as though they're like afraid of the opponents. Whereas like in Haikyuu, it's more like they have to psych themselves up and convince themselves that they're good enough to play, and then they win, and it's like, oh my god, we did it, we overcame the enemy. Whereas these characters are more like, fuck you guys for saying you're better than us, we're gonna prove that we're actually better than you. You know, and it's always got that sort of like cocky, antagonistic feeling to it. Every bad guy in the show always starts off like, you know, any enemy team will be like, oh, we have to fight these weaklings? Psh, what a bunch of babies, you know? And then the main team are like, oh, hell no. They did not just say that about us. We're going to show them up, you know? So even though their team is considered weak by everyone around them, you don't really have this sense that they're actually the weaker team. And of course, I think that works better with with a long-running shonen story anyways, because we know they're not gonna lose. Like, at worst, they're gonna lose either at the end of the story, or, like, either it's gonna be the kind of thing where, you know, it goes all the way to the end of the Inter-High and they lose the championship or something like that, and then if the story continues from there, then it's gonna keep going until they do win. So, like, you know, having that idea that, like, oh, what if they're not gonna win is annoying to me when I know they're gonna win. I'd rather have it presented like, alright, we're definitely gonna beat these guys. How are we gonna do it? You know? And then just showing the struggle of how they're gonna do it. And so, like, all that works better for me. So, aside from those things, there's also just small elements that make it work for me. For instance, well, this one actually isn't even small. The music is great in Kuroko no Basket. Like, I really dig the soundtrack. It's all, like, pulse-pounding rock and electronic songs that, like, just get you into the mood. And in a show with wildly inconsistent animation like this one, that does a lot to hold a scene together. Because Kuroko no Basket has moments that look incredible. Like, on average, when they show people, like, playing basketball, when they're, like, doing moves, it usually looks really good. Like, it's kind of impressive. Like, animating the level of, like, musculature and the complexity of movements that these characters have, even when it's not super flashy, it's impressive that they even can animate that. And then it has moments where it's super flashy, and then it also has moments where it's pretty derpy and just, like, awkward. And these can be back-to-back, all three of them, you know? Like, the basketball games are super inconsistent, but playing over all of it, holding the scene together, is this really tense, exciting, you know, rock tunes. And, like, other than the music, I'll say the sound design in this show is, like, kind of all over the place. There's moments where it seems like someone was supposed to talk, but there's no sound, or, like, where they do these fucking terrible montages every once in a while. There was, like, 2 different montages where it would just, like, play the opening theme and show the characters, like, working out or something, and they're really badly done, with awkward sound effects where, like, you can see characters moving and, like, making noise, but you only hear ball noises. It feels like you should be hearing voices, but you don't. There was one moment in one episode where they clearly animated a guy yelling out to the team, but there was no voice there. So I was like, what the hell happened in that shot? So the sound design's kind of all over the place. For some reason, I don't know if this is just on Crunchyroll or if on the broadcast or whatever, but the opening and ending themes sound horribly compressed. They sound like a 240p YouTube video or something, or like they're playing out of phone speakers. That's weird. But in spite of all that, the music itself is so good that it can hold entire scenes together and keep it exciting. So I'm like, yeah, dunk that fucking ball, you know, to this kick-ass music. And then the other thing is that the episodes feel short. And part of that is because they are short, because there's like 3 minutes of intro at the start of every episode. It does like the One Piece thing where it's got a whole intro thing before the opening every episode, and then the whole opening, and then a minute of fucking recap, you know, and then of course at the end, the ending theme. So definitely it feels like the episodes are truncated, and they feel quick. And I like that, because Haikyuu felt like every episode lasted a fucking eternity. And I think that the difference between them, I think the way they're able to do this, but I'm not sure, because I haven't read the manga for either one, is that Haikyuu feels like it tries to structure itself around having complete episodes, where, like, one episode tells a story, or 2 episodes tell an arc. Like, they introduce a character at the start of an episode, then we see what that character is going through, and by the end of the next episode, we see the end. Or, like, one episode starts off with setting up a match, and by the end of the next episode, you'll see the end of the match. Kuroko no Basuke just kind of cuts in and out, like, when it needs to. It just kind of, you know, runs to the end of an episode. I mean, something kind of dramatic will happen, but it doesn't structure it around, like, this episode will end with the end of the match. It'll be like the end of the match could happen 8 minutes in, and then we move into the next thing, and then at the end of the episode, it'll hype you for the next match, you know? It just feels like it was less concerned about each episode being its own package, whereas Haikyuu feels like it is. So, you know, it's easier to marathon, I would say. Haikyuu felt kind of like, if you watched it week by week, I think it would give you more of a like sizable portion of story than Kuroko no Basket would. Whereas Kuroko no Basket, when you're watching it all at once, it's just like, play the next episode, I need to know what happens next. And that's because, getting back to the structure, something it does extremely well is providing you with, like, knowing what's going to come next, like what is in the future. The very first scene of the show, with that little intro monologue, tells you that there's 5 superpowered badasses out there who Kuroko went to school with. And by the end of, like, episode 1, you understand that his team is going to have to fight each of them. Each one is going to be even more powerful than the last. They're just these 5 badasses lurking out there on other teams. So immediately, it puts it in your head, okay, I want to know what each of these guys can do. What makes them so special? Can Kuroko and this other dude get strong enough to beat them by the time that they have to face off? Immediately, intrigue. And then it takes it one step further by having them face one of the 5, like they face the weakest of the 5 right in, like, the next episode. It's like the first arc is about fighting, you know, a team with that guy on it just for a practice match. But it establishes, like, how strong are these guys? What kind of abilities do they have? You know, and then by the end of that match, you already want to see what the other 4 guys are going to do. And you also want to see if that guy's going to get stronger, because he's kind of like the friendlier one who, you know, maybe will be around. He's more of like a rival character. So it sets up so much from so early. Whereas in Haikyuu, there was like, they set up for this Nekoma match, which was the mid-season finale kind of thing. Like, after episode 13 was the end of the Nekoma match, and after that, there was nothing that I knew was coming other than the Inter-High. Like, they got through that match, and I was like, I felt so comfortable stopping there, because there was nothing I had questions about. There hadn't been any other teams that they'd set up, like big rivals looming in the distance, any other characters they're going to have to fight. I mean, we know they're probably going to face Nekoma again someday, but I don't know when that's going to happen. We just know that there's an Inter-High coming, and it just kind of stops. In Kuroko no Basuke, they fought 2 of the 5, you know, ultimate players, the Generation of Miracles, and so we know there's 3 more. They introduced the next one at the end of the episode, so, like, you know, we get a picture of him, and he's all like, I'm gonna fuck him up, they're gonna have to face me next, and I'm like, alright, now I want to know what this guy's abilities are, you know, what's he gonna do? So, it does a much better job of, like, getting us ready for all the characters. Now, again, the show's not, like, perfect, and it has some issues. My biggest problem with it is that, again, it sets itself up really well for ass pulls, and because it goes very fast, and it just kind of flies through ideas in, like, the opposite way of Haikyuu, it makes it a lot easier to, like, have a situation where you're like, oh, that guy could do that all this time? In Haikyuu, I complained that, we'll see a character having an ability, and then, like, 5 different times we'll have it explained, this character can do this. Oh, that's what his thing is. You know, first we have it set up, then we have it explained, then we see it in action, then they react to it, then they explain it again, you know, it's, like, too much. But in Kuroko no Basuke, they'll be in the middle of a match, and it'll be like, oh, by the way, this dude can do this thing, you know, and then suddenly that's now part of it, and you're like, oh, why didn't we know that earlier? So it's like 2 different extremes. Haikyuu way over-explains everything. This show doesn't explain it till the last minute, which makes it feel kind of cheap, but so far nothing has happened that's been, like, so cheap that I was like, oh, really, you know? So, yeah, for now, it's just enough to hold my attention. And I know I've ranted for quite some time, but I was really deeply fascinated with this, just making this distinction between these 2 shows. Like, it was all I could think about. So, like, once I stopped the episode, I really had, like, once I got to 13, I had to get this all off my chest. And now my stomach feels like it's going to explode. So, see you later. One more for the road. I can't quite decide if this has hit Peacemaker Kurogane or Kaikan phase. I guess it's got more of the picture of Kaikan phrase, and I don't know anything about Kaikan phrase, so I'm more curious about it. So I just watched the first episode of Kaikan Phrase, and I decided to put it on hold for reasons that I'll get into in a second. But this is another case where, like, as I was discovering information about this show, I slowly became fascinated with it. So this is a show that the first thing I saw is like a bunch of pretty boys, and the show is called Sensual Phrase. That's the translation. So I was like, okay. And I was seeing that it was like a show about music. All the guys are in a band, and there was a bunch of comparisons to Nana. So I'm thinking, and it's like a shoujo adaptation. So I'm thinking this is going to be like a romance drama with lots of pretty boys, and the backdrop of being about music, about these guys like forming a band or something. And I mean, Nana's a great series, so that's, strong company to be in. But then as I was like looking through the information, first I see that it's written by Yoshida Reiko, who is one of my favorite anime writers. She's the one who wrote K-On! And Tamako Market and a shit ton of other stuff. Maria-sama ga Meiteru. She has a ton of writing credits. But I also was like, okay, well, this is an adaptation, so, I don't know how much her mark would be left on it. Now, what I do know is that she wrote K-On!, which was an anime that's nothing like the manga, really. Like, K-On! Is a very basic 4-koma manga that's just like a silly high school slice of life thing that the anime takes and expands on dramatically and gives it a whole, like, narrative arc and all this depth and stuff. So I was curious about what kind of adaptation it would be, and then I start reading reviews on Mal, and apparently it's wildly different from the manga, because the manga is exactly as I described, like a romance drama with the backdrop of being about music. And the main character in the manga is like this high school girl who ends up like falling in love with the singer of a band who's super famous, and she's like trying to grapple with competing against all the other, women in the world who love him and want to fuck him. And I guess there's like lots of sex. Like, the impression I'm getting is that the manga is extremely smutty, and that's like one of the main selling points of it. The author seems to have done lots of smut manga. Whereas the anime doesn't even have the main character girl show up until 21 episodes in, and is instead entirely about the band, how they form, like, all of them, like, their passions for music and stuff, and it's totally, like a music-focused show, in the vein of, like, Beck. Like, the first episode was more like the first episode of Beck even than Nana. Like, it was really just about these dudes trying to form this band and being really passionate about music. So I couldn't help but feel like, oh my god, Yoshida Reiko strikes again, except 10 years earlier, because this show's from 1999, so quite old. And yeah, it's like a totally different thing. So that has my attention. And the first episode was fairly good. The animation's not great. It's pretty fucking basic. There's band scenes where people are playing, and it's just kind of like hands strumming a guitar. You're lucky if they're even moving. It's like lots of still images. The characters are pretty detailed. It's a bunch of Bishonen, quintessentially 90s designed. Everyone's way over-designed, sort of visual kei style. Well, maybe not quite that level. They're not like wearing full makeup or anything, but they're in costumes all the time, But okay, here's why I'm putting it on hold. And like, the writing was pretty okay, the directing was strong, pacing was good. It felt like a pretty interesting first episode, like something I would probably watch more of. I don't know if it stays interesting. I don't know like what it ultimately ends up being about, considering that it apparently changes the manga so considerably that the main character of the manga is like a minor supporting character who shows up halfway through the show. But the only available versions of this show online, be that for streaming, download, wherever, is VHS rips. Like, shit quality VHS rips. Like, flickering bottom and top of screen, like, janky, lo-fi, probably, God, I don't even know how many pixels per inch it could be considered. It looks like garbage. And it's funny, I saw one review who was like, this show came out in the 90s, but it looks like it's from the 70s. And I'm like, it's not that the show looks like it's from the 70s. It actually looks like it's from like the early era of digital like color work or something. I'm not sure about that. I couldn't tell if it was cell or colored. It's so low quality, it's hard to fucking tell. But you can tell it's from the 90s. It looks like a 1999 show. It's just that the quality of the images is fucking ass. It looks ancient somehow. Sounds terrible. So like, on the one hand, I was kind of interested to watch more, but on the other hand, I don't know if I can watch more of this, like, bottom tier quality video. I mean, God, it's jarring to see something from 99 look, like, you know, most stuff from then at least had a DVD release. This has nothing of the sort. I guess even in Japan it's never been released on DVD, or if it has, then no one cared enough to subtitle it. I have no idea, but it looks terrible. So, kind of sad. And, like, as I was watching the episode, I noticed that more, like, less and less, you know, it kind of faded away as I got interested in the story and characters. So, it wasn't so bad that I think it would be unwatchable forever. I'd love it if I could just put the show on hold and there just miraculously happens to be a DVD release at some point. I have no idea how much interest there is. According to Mal, this is only on like 7,800 lists, so this is not a super well-known show, at least here. I don't know how well-known it is in Japan. The manga ran for 18 volumes from 97 to 2000, so yeah, I really don't know. I mean, I'd never heard of it at all, so obviously it's not even popular enough that I would definitely have heard of it. So I have no idea if I'll watch more of this, but I'm going to put it on hold because I didn't think it was uninteresting, and maybe eventually I'll decide that, fuck it, I'll just watch it in spite of the video quality. But anyways, that's all I have to say about that one. That's probably it for this video, because I fucking talked about Kuroko no Basuke for 30 fucking minutes. But I'll see you in the next one of these random selection videos. I don't know which one it'll be. I got 5 different series of them going now.